Hello.
Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shamet. And my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski here from Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler here from Solomon Day School of Long Island. We're in Pinchas. We're going to do Pinchas. Pinchas ben Alazar ben Aaron HaKohen. Soft-mannered person, docile,
Gentleman.
gentle human being, kind of person that you could sit down, really have a conversation with. You know,
And he'll slowly and gently describe to you the error of your ways, persuade you there's a different
persuasive,
way, and
gentle.
it doesn't work out.
So
There's always
I
a
see him being played in the movie by Joe Pesci in Goodfellas.
Describe. Continue.
Well, so glibness aside, he is not just prone to violence, he is violent. He's a killer.
Yeah.
And no matter how we dress that up, at the end of the day, he kills two people in the sacred precincts, which is never
Is there
a
any
good
way
thing.
to dress that? I mean, is this one of those things in the Torah that we just gotta say, okay,
You know
there's
what
no defense of this, or there's
it's
no.
it's so difficult because first of all, the Torah, Pinchas ben Elazar, Heshivet Hamati, Bekanod Kinati. Pinchas did a great thing. He restrained my anger, sort of like a cathartic gesture on the part of this one zealot that says, "Okay, okay, God says now I don't have to wipe them out because I was so angry." Pinchas diverted my anger. We live in a world, so the Torah clearly gives him a round of applause. We live in a world where should be completely acutely aware of the dangers of zealotry. We are living we're recording this at a moment. We're recording this a little bit early before the parasha comes up, but there was just recently a series of terrible, violent zealotry acts against the Palestinians in the territories by some of the settlers, which the army did not restrain. We can see that there's violent extremism and zealotry that's a mess. But I would say two things. First of all, the the Talmud says quite clearly, Pinchas shelo b'ratzon chachamim. The sages, who our rabbinic tradition is moderate, it is discursive. You persuade, you don't stab. They're clearly uncomfortable with this story. But I'm just thinking, as an American now, what is our relationship to John Brown? Okay, John Brown was an anti-slavery zealot. He was clearly the right side of history. He was clearly committed that people should not be enslaved, and he was a violent zealot who killed lots of people. Like, do we want to sort of applaud and say, thank heavens somebody had the courage to fight for the right and to resist the evil? And do we want to say, yeah, but you really should have been, less murderous about
So
it?
I think what we often fail to come to terms with is the precipitating act. So we could put John Brown aside for another time, perhaps, but we have to look at the case of Pinchas. So the people are engaged. I think Milgram points this out in his commentary. This is the bookend to the Egel HaZahav. This is, if it had not been for the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, at the beginning of the national journey outside after Egypt, this is the concluding great sin. And the fate of the people hangs in the balance, because if they are entirely enticed by the pagan women and the pagan rituals in which they participate, then this will end the experiment with
It's
Israelite
over, right?
religion. And therefore, under those circumstances, things that we cannot otherwise imagine, it's not a time for reasoned reflection, because that time is past. One can parenthetically make the same argument about John Brown. So he killed a dozen people, but the Civil War, which people were trying to avoid, killed 500,000.
Right. So he
And
perceived, or did he? I mean,
there's always a price tag on things. And unfortunately in history, we only know what happens. We never know what didn't happen. And I think we at least have to raise the question, is there another way out for the Israelites short of Pinchas killing the two people?
That's the dead end that we're in. I mean, because the Torah makes this act a necessary act, and the rabbis and we have tremendous difficulty with this.
As we should. I mean, religious zealotry is just, so toxic, and we see it in so many ways in the contemporary world. No doubt, all through history. But when you feel, I mean, Barry, is what you said about the precipitating act. Obviously, we have an awareness that the Torah is told a story that the two people, Zimri and Cosby. I mean, she's the Midianite and he's the Israelite. They are in this orgiastic moment, like it couldn't be less ambiguous, couldn't be more unambiguous. They are flouting all the necessary norms. They are rebelling, and they've done a terrible, terrible thing. And so Pinchas has to rise to the occasion and stop them. And maybe this story is implying that Moshe was getting a little old and a little slow on the draw, and maybe he should have stopped him, but he didn't do it. So Pinchas came through for him when Moshe failed. But the truth is that in almost every human encounter nowadays, people should be a whole lot more ambiguous about the good and the evil, and not look at somebody and say, you are just completely horrible and you must die. That's the worst thing that religions can do, and that happens all too often.
So I'm thinking that, this is almost like a wrestling match or a spectacle. There's a spectacle aspect to this, where the two infringers of normality and morality are taken out in a spectacle of zeal, and they're applauded by not only the audience but by God Himself. And yet, so what happens to Pinchas? Pinchas is given Briti Shalom, which I want to read as this is a way to put him in a box. Basically, he needs to be this zeal needs to be sequestered. It's just too powerful. These people have too much energy, and if they run amok in the community, nobody will withstand their zeal. That's what you do with zealous people.
So what I would add, kind of reminds me, in the violence aspect of the Supreme Court decision, Bush versus Gore, because part of the decision was that no precedents would come from it. And I think what we have in the case of Pinchas is an event that is one of a kind, in which we cannot draw any conclusions for future events. In other words, we can't use it to justify religious zealotry because it doesn't speak to the future. It spoke only at that moment.
Good luck with that. I mean, good luck with that, because I know that I've done this many times. I'm sure we have all done this. When you want to break a rule, you tell your congregants, this is setting no precedent, and good luck with that, because this is a story of the divine, affirmation, and I can only imagine that plenty of people throughout history, both in our religion and in other religions that inherit the Bible, look at this and say, "Oh my God, I'm seeing such depravity all around me," and somebody has to stand up and shoot the abortion provider, or somebody has to stand up and do this or that. I mean, it just produces. I don't see how a story like this it can really be safely cordoned off. And as a religious person, the only thing that I can say is, and this is kind of what Elliot said before, is that this just has to be one of those moments in reading the Torah that we say, okay, listen, this religious history is long, it's diverse, and some of the times it goes down the wrong alley.
And so maybe there's a recognition that we possess there's no other word, some ugliness. There's some ugliness and some we possess a moment of immorality in the Torah, and it makes us all squirm, makes us all very.
In the Midrashic tradition, there's I know this is in the Zohar, I'm pretty sure it's in the conventional Midrash too, that Pinchas hu Eliyahu, or Eliyahu hu Pinchas.
Yeah.
There's like a Gilgul, there's a reincarnation thing going on there. And you may remember that in Kings 19, it's got to be First Kings, right? First Kings 19, yeah. Eliyahu, has this contest with the prophets of Baal, and he tells them to, make their sacrifices, and Baal won't ignite their sacrifices, and Eliyahu does his sacrifice and douses it with water, and then says, "Master of the world, show your stuff." And God ignites the sacrifices, and in response, Eliyahu kills 400 prophets of Baal. Like he's got them. He's dusted them, and he is tremendously bloody. And I think that whoever the authors of that midrashic tradition, that those two characters are one and the same soul, is really onto something.
They're onto something. Okay, so let's move through the Parsha. We're going to skip over the details of the census. We're going to skip over the Tzalafchad, but not Tzalafchad episode also. But I want to focus on this really tender moment, maybe a powerful, dramatic moment. Moses is being told, ascend these heights of Abarim, we're in chapter 27, verse 12, and view the land that I have given to the Israelite people. When you have seen it, you too shall be gathered to your kin, just as your brother Aaron was. For in the wilderness of Zin, when the community was contentious, you disobeyed my command to uphold my sanctity in their sight by means of the water. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, let the Lord, source of all, so the breath of all the flesh, appoint someone over the community who shall go out before them and come in before them, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that the Lord's community may not be like sheep that have no shepherd. The Lord answered Moses, single out Joshua, son of Nun, an inspired man, and lay your hand upon him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community, and commission him in their sight. Invest him with some of your authority, so that the whole Israelite community may obey. But he shall present himself to Eleazar the priest, who shall on his behalf seek the decision of the Urim before the Lord. By such instruction they shall go out, and by such instruction they shall come in, he and all the Israelites, the whole community. Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community. He laid his hands upon him and commissioned him, as the Lord had spoken through Moses. Vayismoch et yadav, both hands. Vayitzaveu kasher diber Adonai b'yad Moshe. So many layers to that story. It's tactile, it's touching, literally.
Well said. Overlooked upon.
It's a peaceful transition of power, and it's fraught with all the vulnerabilities of transition, and what does it mean to be Joshua after Moses, and what is Moses trying to do here? Moses, I give him a lot of credit. There are lots of things we can criticize Moses for in terms of his anger, in terms of other aspects of his leadership. But the one thing that stands out here that I think we could comment on is that he wants succession. And I guess...
Well, so he was anticipating the series.
The series. You're only as good as your successor, or so maybe
this
not.
This is the Moses that you want.
This is the Moses you want.
But ultimately, I rather prefer the Moses of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, where he does not take it lying down. The divine decree that he cannot enter the promised land. Here, you imagine Moses saying, "Oh God, aren't you just forgetting one thing? Who's going to lead the people if I'm God?" Now, if we think that God is the master of the universe, you would think that God might have provided for that without telling Moses at the moment who he's going to do. So this is the Moses that we want. But Joshua, in some ways, is like the rabbi who succeeds the predecessor who was there for 40 years.
Well, I'm one of those people, right?
And it doesn't always work out.
It worked out for me, thank God.
Especially, well, one of the differences here, Elliot, is that Joshua is only going to get part of what Moshe had by design.
Yes, okay.
He's not going to be allowed to inhabit Moses's role.
Well, look, that it's clear that that's the dynamic. That's the dynamic I play. At least,
Right. Well, you could not imagine taking your position all those many years ago.
Yes.
If you had been told you're not going to be your predecessor, don't even think of it.
I was told exactly that. I was told exactly, but aside from that, it's what I want to, latch on to in what you said is that, we've studied this book thus far with lots of problems with leaders and lots of political problems. We've had the Korach rebellion. We've had the vulnerability of, the spies. We've had, lots and lots of different kinds of crises in which leadership has been called to question, and it is somewhat stunning, as you say, that this was not laid out beforehand, and that Moses has to beg God basically for the successor. It's in Moses' interest to have that because Moses is now identified with the people too. He does love them and he does care for them, despite the fact that he's not the person that you necessarily want to sit down and have a beer with. I don't know. We're talking about this parsha shortly after an interesting ceremony of smicha, of ordination. We were present at the ordination of our colleague, Rabbi Jason Rogoff, Mazel Tov. And this passage was invoked, as it is invoked in almost every ordination and every kind of inauguration or every installation. There's a succession, it invokes this story. And it only suggests that successions are vulnerable, that if they fail, the whole project fails. If they succeed, it seems that everything kind of worked out and that's the way it always was supposed to be. But rabbinic ordination, I think, carries with it all sorts of responsibilities and all sorts of, hopes for the future, etc. To be present at an ordination, to be present at a rabbinic ordination, it's, in Jewish history, this is the ordinations that we know and we have experienced are somewhat new in the history of the Jewish people. I doubt that the Rambam had a big ceremony, right?
Apparently the Mishnah Brura got his by telegram.
Apparently, yeah. So it's these ceremonies are tekes hasmicha, tiksei hasmicha. They're quite new, and yet they're very, very meaningful.
But go on.
Good.
There's something curious here because Moshe filled a number of different roles in the Torah. He was the prophet, he was the lay leader, so to speak, and he was the priestly leader in the sense as well. So Eleazar is going to be the high priest after Moshe is gone. Yoshua is going to be the lay leader, but there's not going to be a prophet provided for. And, in our tradition, we identify Moshe as Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the common way to refer to him. Moses, our teacher, Moses, our rabbi. And then Yigdal, Rambam emphasizes that Moses was the greatest prophet who ever lived. So you would think that role of Moses might have been provided for with a person as well.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, the Bible, Deuteronomy will contradict itself. At one point, Moses says, don't worry, God's going to make another prophet, Kamoni, like me. But at the very end, as you're referring to, the very end of the Torah, it says, that there never was another prophet who arose like Moshe. Moshe is class all by himself. It may be the case that the Torah wants to double down on what Jewish history will ultimately say, that only one person, Moshe, is the conduit for law from God. Ein Navi Rashai Latid l'chadesh davar me'ata. After Moses, nobody else gets to have new biblical deoraita legislation, but we have a vast corpus of rabbinic legislation, things which are derabanan, as I'm sure our listeners know. We have two categories, like things that are taken to be the primary Torah rules and legislation, which comes from God through Moshe, but then we have the whole set of human contributions, and listening to you, Elliot, talk about the rabbinic ordination, there's promise, there's responsibility, there is an authority to interpret the sacred tradition. Like if you hand it over to graduates of a rabbinical school or graduates of a rabbinical program, or in the more informal way that it was in pre-modern times, that somebody a teacher would write to that the student so and so was authorized yoreh yadin yadin. This person is qualified to teach and to rule. Then you are saying that, listen, we rely upon you to interpret this sacred tradition, and that's really moving. That's really, really intense. So I feel the burden of it, and I feel the tremendous joy that that's my life, man. I and lucky lives that this is our job.
So tied to that also, and I'm not sure if I'm able to read this back into the text, to kind of layer onto this ordination of Joshua, both the conserving aspect of the tradition and the innovative aspect of the tradition. Rabbis are given this kind of mantle, literally, in which they are the preservers, but they're also the experimenters and the innovators. And I think, all religious life deals with that tension, and specifically within Judaism, we have that tension, and specifically within our movement of Judaism, conservative Judaism, we have a lot of adherence to tradition and a lot of initiative in terms of innovation, especially in times of change. We are living through great times of change. Just technology. I mean, the fact that the three of us can sit, in our respective places and have a chavruta and record it and disseminate it is unthinkable to not even a generation ago. It's unthinkable 10 years ago. I mean, it would never have occurred to any of us to do something like that, and we know how many thousands of lives are touched by this conversation on a weekly basis.
Tens of thousands.
So, Elliot, you talked so eloquently about smicha, and it's worth mentioning that smicha, there's a double-edged sword to smicha, because smicha also refers to the laying on the hands of the animal before you sacrifice it, which leads to the interesting observation that if your smicha, your ordination doesn't work out, you end up as a korban, a sacrifice.
Right.
Well, this is like the line in the Gemara is techet l'smicha shchita. Like immediately, as soon as you lay your hands on, then you got to slaughter the beast. So this is little did you know that all those years later, after you took that job, following the guy who'd been in it for 40 years, and they told you, you're never going to be that guy.
Well, they told me that at the beginning.
Still are.
Do they still tell you that today?
Absolutely. Well, less so, because let's face it.
Because those people are gone.
They reside in the other shul. The upstairs shul.
Yeshiva Shamal.
No, but look, for all of us, it's 1990. So we're coming on. For me, it's 1990. That was the ordination year. 33 years. 33
So
years.
we have a minute or two left.
Yeah.
Was Moses a success? And did Joshua succeed him well?
Well, we're the living proof of that. I think maybe the fact that that's the question is left to debate tells us that it is a success. Because, do we want Moses to be the Lincoln of Judaism? We would say that the greatest president, okay? By all estimations, he was the greatest president, except to John Wilkes Booth.
Who was a Pinchas? John Wilkes Booth was a Pinchas.
Who was the Pinchas? Okay, they hated him. They absolutely despised him in his time, but
the greatest presidents were I would say Franklin Roosevelt and Lincoln and Washington, and plenty of people just hated him. So for sure Moses is a tremendous success. I mean, you obviously had his rocky moments, but he did lead people out of slavery. No pun. Lead people out of slavery. He leads them to the edge of the promised land. By the way, he's the conduit of the Torah, and thousands of years later, we're still revering the book. But for Joshua, I just want to point out that we said, I think before we were starting, maybe we said this on camera, but it was before we started recording, that it's a religion of longing and not arrival. Which I think is quite correct and quite beautiful, because to be a human being is to intuit that there is something transcendent, intuit there is something eternal and infinite from our posture of being finite and being mortal, but there is another infinite and immortal element, and that's how I feel as a religious person. But we'll never arrive at it. As best it's asymptotic. You'll get closer and closer and closer, but you never arrive. And interestingly, Moshe, of course, never arrives, never comes to the promised land. But also at the end of Joshua, the book of Joshua will say, and they had lots of military successes, but they never really root out all of the other people. I'm not recommending expelling all the other people who live in the Holy Land now. I'm saying that the Bible's goal of the Israelites supplanting all the Canaanites is never attained. And at the very, very end of the book of Joshua, he has a covenant renewal ceremony. Sure. He gathers out the people and say, let's recommit. And I think that's just the best. I think that's just so awesome because you will always have unfinished business, unfinished journeys, unrealized dreams. And the best that you can do is recommit to keep trying. And that's real leadership. I think Joshua is a big success too.
That's a great moment. That's a great point to end with. That it's about recommitting, and I think also, especially since we're being broadcast to Ramah, it's a great message for Ramah, the striving, the longing, and also a sense of recommitment. And that's where we're gonna conclude here. We thank you for recommitting yourselves each week to watching or listening to Parsha Talk. We really appreciate that. And we look forward again to sharing some Torah as we conclude slowly the book of Bamidbar. In the meantime, everybody, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
See you soon.